Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock now, so I'll get started on my little introduction here as people start to trickle in. I just wanted to start by welcoming you all to the Invasive Species Center webinar series. We're very excited to have Rhoda deJonge from BioForest here with us today to talk about a new biological herbicide that can be used to manage invasive buckthorn. My name is Madison Sturba, and I'm the Training and Outreach Intern at the Invasive Species Center, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. While the ISC is based in Sault Ste. Marie, I'm actually speaking to you today from Windsor, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations. I would just like to acknowledge that the Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the lands and waters where each of us attends the webinar this afternoon. If you didn't know about the Invasive Species Center, we're a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. If you pop on over to our website, you'll see lots of great resources. We have best management practices, lots of different species profiles, and video resources. You can also sign up on our homepage for our newsletter, bi-weekly media scan, and event invitations, which is where you can hear about upcoming webinars. As a final little announcement, you can also visit our website to receive updates on the launch of our new training program, which will be coming very soon. We're excited to start offering really cool online courses and in-person workshops, starting with all things forest invasive, so stay tuned for that. That's all the slides I have here, so I'll stop sharing my screen and Rhoda can start to prep hers. I just wanted to ask that if you have any questions, to please post them in the Q&A box, and I'll read them out to Rhoda after her presentation. And with that, I am happy to welcome our guest speaker, Rhoda deJonge, who is a Technical Manager of Urban Forestry at BioForest and Lallemand Plant Care. Thanks so much for joining us, Rhoda. You can take it away whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Madison. Such a great introduction. You guys are great. Always so impressed with all the new things you have going on. So thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about buckthorn. My name is Rhoda deJonge, and I'm the Technical Manager for Urban Forestry here at BioForest, which is part of Lallemand Plant Care. And so what that means is I basically run a lot of the research trials that we do on different microbial technologies for plant growth, or different controls of tree azin for insect pests like emerald ash borer or spongy moth. And it's always really just so fun to share all of the things that we're learning while we're out in the field from all our different research trials. So I will say that the research I'm going to share today is not work that I conducted, but is all thanks to my colleagues, John McLaughlin and Allison Windmill. They put so much work into this research, and Al's actually, fortunately, on a lovely mat leave right now with just a gorgeous baby boy. So she's not here to present, but this is so much of their work, and I'm just thrilled that I get the chance to share it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a bit of a background on Lallemand Plant Care. And I don't normally do this when I talk about my urban forestry research, but I think in this case, it's kind of important because it shows a little bit more about where this biocontrol came from and the strain of this specific fungus and the work that's behind it. And then I'll talk a bit about buckthorn. But if you're in on the call, you probably know a little bit about the issue of buckthorn, so I won't spend too much time there. And then I will start talking about Chondrostereum purpureum, which is the fungus that we have as the active ingredient in our product to control buckthorn. And then I'll talk about the research and future work. So just a bit about Lallemand Plant Care. Lots of you, again, know us as BioForest. You know about our work in helping municipalities with urban forest plans, doing a lot of monitoring for insect pests, and that we do the work to provide the support for tree azin, for controlling emerald ash borer and spongy moth and a few other insect pests. But we are actually part of this larger team of Lallemand Plant Care. And Lallemand Plant Care is actually part of a larger Canadian company based in Montreal. And this is a company that started over 100 years ago with the development of yeasts for the baking industry. And then since that time, they got really good at fermenting yeasts and then as well bacteria, and has spread out into all of these different units, plant care being one of them. And so I think at this point in time, it's like 7 out of every 10 bottles of wine have our yeasts in it. And our yeasts for baking are incredibly common, especially in commercial baking. And we're becoming a little bit more well-known now with all of the folks doing home brewing during these COVID times. But as we learn more and more about microorganisms in the soil and how they can take place of a lot of the chemicals that we use in our plant care work continues to grow. So Lallemand Plant Care, we focus our urban forestry operations in Canada, but we also have work in orchards and vineyards, and are working with academics all over the globe. We have a big presence in Western Europe, in the UK, South Africa. And so this is just part of this larger group of experts that have so much knowledge to share about developing and producing specific microbial strains to help solve these problems in terms of helping plants grow, helping trees grow, and in this case today, helping to control an invasive shrub. So what this means for our work in plant care is, some of our microbial technologies are helping, plants to grow, like we have in our tree survivorship work for urban forestry, helping these trees actually survive once they are planted in an urban environment. But then we also have all of these other products that are related to, controlling insect pests or fungal pests. So it's part of a whole big background of really well-connected work with all these experts all over the world, trying to find the best ways of using these microbes for trees. So that brings us to, invasive buckthorn in North America. One second. There we go. This should look very familiar to you. Here we have the non-native buckthorn on the left, and the non-native buckthorn in the middle, and a native buckthorn on the right. Now, I spent a good deal of my undergrad summers removing buckthorn. And I was always incredibly paranoid that I would accidentally remove a native buckthorn when I was trying to get rid of the large invasive buckthorn. And I quickly learned that these like big behemoth trees that were the European buckthorn were certainly not to be confused with, the short alderleaf buckthorn that's really not going to grow much beyond your knee or your hip. So I always say that that's one of the biggest indicators for you, is that if you're concerned about native species versus non-native species, if it's a very large tree almost, you have very little risk that you're going to be removing a native buckthorn. Some of you might be familiar with my work on Phragmites, and this is a more difficult issue, parsing apart the native Phragmites from the non-native Phragmites. We just had a paper come out in 2021 about that and some of the differences between these insect communities. But I feel like with the European buckthorn versus the native buckthorn, it's much more easy to tell apart. There were 2 different types of European buckthorn. The common buckthorn has thorns and those black berries, and you can see the tooth margins around the edges of the leaves. And then the glossy buckthorn has red to black berries and much more lanceolate leaves, longer leaves, and does not have thorns. So what's the problem? It's a lovely, pretty tree, right? It provides some food for birds, nice in the hedgerows. Yes, sure, but it's also incredibly prolific. So all of those berries, those drupes have a lot of seeds in them, and you get this extensive seed bank, which creates dense thickets where you'll just have so many different little whips coming up. And then these thickets will prevent growth of native trees. And so they can't actually make it to the upper canopy. The buckthorn just outcompetes them. And part of the reason why it outcompetes them is that it's one of the first to put on green leaves in the spring, and then they keep them until very late in the fall. And so it's like it gets this extra like photosynthetic advantage over the growing season. An emerging issue with buckthorn too is that in agricultural areas, particularly in the Midwest of the United States, they're finding that it can harbor soybean aphid over the winter. And so if you have a soybean field next to a hedgerow that's just thick with buckthorn, you're much more likely to have extensive issues with soybean aphid. And that means more chemical sprays and things like that, which we really don't want to see. So some of those ecosystem impacts, I'm a bug girl, so I like to talk about the insects. When you have higher levels of nitrogen and carbon, that can interfere with the overall soil health, and this elevated pH can cause issues when you're trying to replant and restore. But also, it really causes a difference in the litter that's there. And so if you can accelerate the decomposition of the leaf litter, then all of these little critters that rely on the leaf litter all of a sudden are just crashing. They're gone when the leaf litter disappears. And I added 2 more pictures here because a lot of the decomposers in this picture are just, they're not cute. But we have to think about other insects that rely on the leaf litter, like the fireflies here resting on that little mushroom. And a lot of our bees, I think it's somewhere close to 75%, at least what they know, of our native bees are ground nesting bees. And so I care about leaf litter, and I think others should too. And that's a big issue with buckthorn. And you've probably all seen this before, where that once you cut it, it has wonderful offshoots. It grows from those little stumps so well. So you actually have to come back, every other year or so, and then cut all those suckers. And then you come back again, and then you cut all those suckers. And it's incredibly labor intensive. And it takes a lot of time, and it's ugly, and it's difficult work. And then unfortunately, with emerald ash borer, creating these big gaps in our woodlots from the ash dying, all of a sudden, we have many more spaces where buckthorn and other invasive shrubs have just occupied that niche. And then we're going to see more and more of this. And so we're seeing an increase in not just buckthorn, but other invasive shrubs like autumn olive and honeysuckle and multiflora rose with the decline of ash. And so when I was in my undergrad in the United States, what we would often do when we would treat buckthorn is we would have like a little squirt bottle and would cut it and then squirt with some sort of glyphosate or triclopyr. And lots of folks will do that. But there are so many who are concerned about using chemicals even in a limited scope like that. And there are certain places where chemicals are not even permitted in those forestry actions, like the entire province of Quebec. So for those in Quebec, when they cut their buckthorn, they have to come back and manually cut and cut again. And sometimes even those chemical treatments, you're going to have to come back and cut again too. And there are concerns about misuse, spray drift. If you accidentally get some of the chemical on a thin barked tree, you can have impacts on it. Foliar residues, again, the leaf litter I'm always concerned about. Those are some of the concerns that folks have about using chemicals. So with this, I want to jump into talking a bit about the active ingredient in our buckthorn control, and it's called Chondrostereum purpureum. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of it and its mode of action, and then we'll talk about the efficacy. So I have a little clip to share with you here. Okay, so there you see they're putting the paste of the buckthorn, or putting the paste of the Lalcide Chondro around the cambial tissues of the buckthorn. And at this point, it was a new collaborator, and I said, okay, well, you don't have to get, the entire stump, just get all of the living tissue. And so you can see that's how they're applying after that. So what you do is you go to your buckthorn, you cut or you girdle it. And then right after cutting, try to treat as quickly as you can. So that way the product can actually seep into the living tissue. And then you make sure that you treat all of the little stumps that are all associated with each other, because it's not necessarily going to systematically like translocate from one little stump to another. So you can see here that they start with this one, they'll do that one, they'll do that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. So that's how it works. And it's like a little ketchup bottle, almost like a little squeezy bottle. But let's talk about what's in there. Oops. So Chondrostereum purpureum, how it impacts these shrubs is by infecting any open wounds or cuts in the living tissue. So it's necessary that you actually have those cuts or wounds. It's not something that you can spray like as a trunk spray or anything like that, or a foliar spray. You actually have to have a cut wound for it to occupy that woody tissue. And then it causes death in those living tissues. And then it also acts a bit as a saprophyte and can cause decay in that stump. And then inevitably, because it's buckthorn, you will get suckers on your little stump, the little suckers coming up. But here's the beauty of Chondrostereum purpureum, and part of the reason why I think it's just such a fascinating fungus is that it will actually work within those suckers to develop silverleaf disease, where the two layers of the leaf start separating and you get sort of a sheen to them. And so that's what the picture is here on the bottom, is the development of that silverleaf disease. So it's not like it's like one and done and dead. It's a living thing. It's something that you can actually watch progressing. And so if you go out and you cut and then you paint those stumps with the Lalcide Chondro, you can come back just 3 or 4 months later, and your leaf is going to start looking like this, the third or the fourth picture. And then within, a year, you'll likely see something like this. And it's just really neat to watch that disease progression. At least, I find it really quite cool. So, and this Chondrostereum purpureum has not popped out of nowhere. There is actually a ton of research that's gone on into looking at this fungus. It's been well known as a fungus that can control sprouting in hardwoods. And so this is just some of the earliest research, but there is earlier work as well. And I put a little QR code in the bottom there. And that is a very impressive review paper that was just published in 2021. That goes through a lot of the history of the research and talks a bit about applications. So that I highly recommend reading that paper as well. And if you can't do the whole QR code thing, it's just too difficult on your phone, just send me an email and I'll share the paper with you. But here, you can see that folks were working on, willows and looking at how far it goes down into the stumps. Folks have looked at how quickly it can wash away if there's a rainstorm that comes. And then most importantly, there's this paper from the mid-90s out on Vancouver Island where they looked at, okay, you're using a native fungus. This is from a Canadian strain of Chondrostereum purpureum, which exists worldwide in boreal and deciduous forests. Is there any risk that by applying it in high amounts within a woodlot, you're going to have more basidiospores impacting other woody hardwoods in your forest? What if they get all nicked or something like that? And so what they did is they looked at the spore load in those forests before and after, and did a number of really excellent comparisons to see whether there would be any increased impact to non-target species. And they found there isn't. And so that's really relief to me, because I would hate that by controlling, your buckthorn in a woodlot, all of a sudden, your Allegheny plum or something like that, which would be quite susceptible to Chondrostereum purpureum, would have a greater chance of being infected, but that's not the case. And it really comes back to its mode of action. You need to apply it almost immediately to a cut, fresh wound. When they had done a lot of the initial work in selecting this specific strain of Chondrostereum purpureum, they wanted to find one that was really virulent, one that worked really well on the host that it was actually applied on, but one that didn't actually spend too much time in reproducing itself, because that's not going to be helpful. So that's the beauty of this strain. And just a relief to know that there's very little impact to non-target species. So what Lallemand has done, Lallemand Plant Care has done, is all of this work into Chondrostereum purpureum. We registered Lalcide Chondro in 2009 in Canada, and then since 2015 have really been exploring its use for invasive buckthorn. Folks have tried to use Chondrostereum purpureum under power lines, in commercial forestry operations. But really, when you're looking at a very sensitive area and a place where you're probably already using a bit of a squeeze bottle or a paintbrush and something like that to treat your stumps, it's a perfect fit for buckthorn. And we found that folks that have used it have had incredible ease of application, and it's been a great fit for these restoration projects. So then what we've been working on most recently is these research trials, both in Quebec and Ontario, on both types of invasive buckthorn. So let's talk about the research trials. There are more, but the ones I'm going to talk about today are some cut stump trials and then 2 girdle stem trials. So in all cases, what we did is we created plots that were 10 meters by 10 meters, so nice little squares. And then within those 10 meters by 10 meters, we treated everything, or if it was the control plot, we cut everything without treating it, and then tracked specific stems within those plots for long-term monitoring up to 2 years. So let's talk about this cut stump trial in La Street, Quebec. So this is just 3 months after we've gone in and cut the stumps and either let them be or painted them with chondro, like you saw in the little video clip. And already after 3 months, even though you see the suckers coming up on the left side, all of those leaves are very small and are already showing signs of the Chondrostereum purpureum developing silverleaf disease. Whereas on the right, they're incredibly healthy and are forming their nice little buckthorn bush like you expect to see after you cut. And I just want to point out that the little stump you can see on the Lalcide Chondro one, there's some blue staining there, and that's just from our spray paint from our marker in the trial to track those. Otherwise, it can be really difficult to find them if there's no suckers coming off, which is also often the case. So then at this same site, 12 months later, you have this nice bush on the right, and here on the left, it's nearly 100% dead. We would still track this as alive, which is important later. You'll see in the figures that I'm going to share, because there's still a teeny little bit of green here, but you can see that overall, nearly the entire shrub is gone, and it was a big one. Like, look at that stump. And so that within 18 or 24 months, that stump on the left will be completely dead. And so here you can see what this kind of looks like in the field. I think that's John McLaughlin standing out there, and in like, it looks like a pouring rain. Like I said, John and Al put so much work into these trials, all of this cutting and hauling and painting, just very impressive. But here you can see the treated stems on the left. There's basically nothing higher than your knee, compared to on the right where the shoots are over 2 meters in height. Just incredible. This was treated, at the same time. Just such a difference. And this is what it looks like immediately post-harvest. So you can see that no matter where you are, everything was nice and clear, whether it was a control plot or a Lalcide Chondro plot. But then after 24 months, when you go back, here's my colleague Al in a Lalcide Chondro plot, where there's a few little suckers here or there, or that might even be suckers that weren't treated, but you compare that to the control and you can barely see her, even though she's wearing, a high vis vest. And if anything, that speaks to the importance of not just cutting these shrubs and walking away, that you either need to come back and recut, or in this case, use the Lalcide Chondro to prevent the regrowth if you don't have as much access to cheap labor. And this is what it looks like on the individual plant basis. So on the left there, you can see it's completely dead after 24 months. And the ferns all of a sudden have a little bit more space to grow here. And sometimes you can barely find them. My colleague Elsa and I went back to this site in Quebec this fall. And we were looking at another trial close by, and we, out of curiosity, we just walked over to this site, and it was incredible. The moss on the ground had completely subsumed any trunks that were, or any little stumps that were left from the Chondro Buckthorn site, and so you couldn't even tell that there had been buckthorn there at one point in time, except for every once in a while you saw a little tag and a little bit of blue spray paint poking through the moss. But it just was really just so exciting to see. So just in summary from these trials, this is the figure on the right is reporting the results from the Lestry site. So when you go back to these sites after 1 year, the control has only 12% that have died just from cutting, and so that means you have 88% that are still alive. And at 12 months, we didn't see a ton of 100% death in the Lalcide Chondro treated shrubs, like I had showed you in that one picture where there was like a little bit of green left and all those dead suckers. We would still call that alive. So if you looked at a scale of how alive each one of those were, I mean, maybe they were only 50% or 25% alive. But it's really much more informative to see, which ones are completely dead. And so when you come back 24 months later, 2 years later, that's when you see complete death by the Lalcide Chondro. Oh, I said that wrong. I'm realizing that after 12 months, 81% death. And then after 2 years, you see 100% death. Sorry about that, my error, misread at the bottom. So regardless, it's very encouraging to see that you have just such incredible visual differences between the shrubs that are just cut and the shrubs that are treated with the Lalcide Chondro after cutting. And so after 24 months, that's when you'll see the final excellent differences. So now I'm going to quick talk about girdling trials, because some people do prefer to girdle their buckthorn. So in this case, just a little bit of information about girdling. If you're less familiar, you can see here where you go through and you leave all the shrubs standing, but you're removing all the living tissue for about a 3 to 4 centimeter band. And then you go through and you paint it with the Lalcide Chondro. And so when you come back to these sites, you're still going to have the big trunk coming out, and you're looking at the suckers, and you can see that after even just a few months, there's barely living tissue on the living leaves left on those little suckers, compared to the control where they have a nice little vibrant shoot coming out. At 16 months, you see near complete death. In this case, you can see even a little bit of the fruiting bodies emerging. So that it's actually the fungus that has killed them and nothing else. It's the fungus doing the work. And so in summary, we can see here that this is in reference to the Oakville trial. The control in the end, by just cutting, you had 33% of those shrubs dead. So that means like 67% of them were still alive after 24 months, but only 7% of the ones treated with Lalcide Chondro were still alive after 24 months. And yeah, after a year, that's when you see that big jump in mortality. So just to summarize, here we're seeing, between 81 to 100% efficacy after 24 months, compared to much lower levels of control by the control plots, where you're just cutting. So let's talk a little bit more about how we actually apply the product, because this is important. You can see this and say, okay, this is cool, I want to try this. But it is important to apply properly so that way you can get those 100% results. It's a manual one-time application with the squeezy bottle, like I showed in the little video, for stumps that are less than 6 centimeters in size. You would just treat the entire stump. But if they're larger, then you can just get the cambial tissue on the outside. And then for girdled stems, yes, a minimum 3 centimeter band width, and then complete coverage on that girdled stem. And then try to treat all the stems that are over 1 centimeter diameter in a plot, and try to keep those stumps low. So don't cut them at knee height. It'll make it harder work for the Chondrostereum to reach all the way through the whole stump. So cut them nice and low to the ground, between 6 and 10 centimeters. And so you need to treat every single little stump that's part of a little group, if that's what you have, and then apply as quickly as you can after cutting, just to allow it to seep into the wood. I had mentioned earlier that someone had done some excellent research in Finland, actually looking at how quickly Chondrostereum purpureum would wash away after a rain event. And they had excellent results. I mean, we do recommend that you don't treat if there's a heavy rain within 48 hours. It just gives you that much more opportunity for the Chondrostereum purpureum to seep into the wood. But if you happen to have like a surprise rainfall, as long as you have treated those stumps or those girdled stems near immediately, there should be Chondrostereum purpureum in that wood. The other important thing to mention is timing, specifically for buckthorn, because it's such a vigorous grower. So it's important to cut these stumps not in October, which is when we often will treat buckthorn, but instead from around mid-June to mid-July for greatest efficacy. And that's because at that point in time, the buckthorn has had full leaf out, it's exhausted a lot of its root reserves, and then you're cutting it down and you're sort of zapping all of that energy from it, and then hitting it with the chondro. So for buckthorn, that is the best time to treat at this point in time. So if you want greatest efficacy, that's when we recommend. And then of course you need to have your applicator's license to apply, even though it is a native, naturally existing fungus, like Canadian strain of this fungus, because it is a bioherbicide, you do need your pesticide applicator's license to apply. So just in summary, it's a great biological solution for preventing resprouting and then regrowth of those sprouts. You do need less PPE than required for chemical applications. You just do it one time. And then, yeah, it's another excellent tool in the toolbox for specifically areas where you want to use fewer chemicals, or you're specifically interested in restoration of the site. So where do we go from here? We've done a fair bit of work on buckthorn. Our label also includes alder species and a few others. But what we continue to get questions about are not those species, but instead autumn olive, honeysuckle, multiflora rose, Norio maple, Manitoba maple, tree of heaven, burning bush, you name it, any invasive shrub. we get requests. Does it work? How well does it work? When do I apply? And based on all of that expansive literature on Chondrostereum and purpureum in general, we know that it will quite likely work very well on any hardwood shrub. But we want to make sure that we have the proper efficacy data. We know exactly when to apply it for those different species. And those pests are not on the label yet, or those invasive shrubs are not on the label yet. So this summer, with the help of a wonderful master's student from the University of Toronto's Faculty of Forestry, we will be undergoing a whole nother suite of trials looking at these other invasive shrubs. And we could not be doing that without the help of so many excellent nonprofit, municipal partners, conservation authorities. They have the land, they have the invasive shrubs, and it's kind of really just a lot of fun to work together with them to set up these trials and figure out a way to control, as many invasive shrubs as we possibly can using non-chemical methods. Some of the additional research that we'll be doing is looking at expanding that application window. So as I mentioned, just I think on the last slide, we do suggest that you treat between mid-June and mid-July for greatest efficacy. But questions keep coming up. Okay, I just don't have time during then. What if I treat in May? Is my efficacy going to only be 50%, or is it 80 or 90%, something I can deal with? What about if I treat in August? My summer students have plenty of time in August. What does the efficacy look like in August? And so we want to be able to give better answers to questions about overall efficacy throughout the summer and into the early fall, just to give people more of an opportunity to treat when they have time. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. And again, there's another QR code there, and that just leads to our website where we have like the label, SDS, some of this trial information, just so you can have it on hand if you wanted to learn more. So shall I maybe just go through these myself? I can see the Q&A
I got
box
you.
here. You got
I'll
me?
list them off for you.
Okay, cool.
Thanks so much. That was a fantastic talk. There's lots of interest here, tons of questions. So I'll start with the ones that came in through the Q&A box, and then I'll head over to the ones in the chat.
Yeah.
So what type of PPE is required for application? Also, is there a preferred time for application? Which you kind of already touched on, but
yeah. So I already touched on that. So you'll need your gloves, your long sleeves, your closed-toed boots. But I think the one difference, and I might no. I think the one big difference is no goggles. You don't need the goggles like you would if you're using a chemical instead.
Sounds great. Thank you. Do you need to follow the Ontario Regulation 6309 for signage, transportation, storage, and cosmetic pesticide ban and associated exceptions as a Class C pesticide, even though its an active ingredient is biological?
I would think so. I always defer to my colleague Elsa Cousineau. She knows those sorts of things a little bit better than I do, but yeah, even if the active ingredient is biological, you still need a pesticide applicator's license. And so I would assume that anything else related to it being a Class C pesticide would still apply. We have the same thing with triazine. It's a plant-based extract, not a synthetic chemical, and yet you still need to abide by all of those same rules for storing and applying.
Thank you. Okay. Understanding that chemical herbicides are not allowed in Quebec forest management, are there any studies comparing efficacy of the biological control to that of chemicals, specifically tricloper?
Yeah, and actually that 2021 paper that I mentioned earlier with the little QR code, which I can send to you, they share a number of different studies where chemical treatment and Chondrostereum purpureum, not necessarily our specific strain, are compared head to head in research trials. And often it depends on the species, the application type. The one thing I would caution is if you're digging into any of that literature, one thing that folks don't always do, which they need to, is when you're dealing with biological, you need to wait, you need to watch it, and you need to let it live and grow, just like that progression of the silverleaf disease. And so if you want to compare like a trichopyr or glyphosate to Lalcide Chondro, I wouldn't go back just at the 4-month mark. You need to go back at the year mark or the 24-month mark, and then you'll see that the efficacy is nearly similar. Nearly the same. And so if you're looking at any of those research trials, that's the one thing that I would keep an eye out for. But yeah, the results are comparable. Like, it's pretty awesome. When you have 100% control after 2 years, like, you can't get much better than that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, the next one here. Why treat the entire stem if under 6 centimeters when it seemed to work well to just do the cambium layer?
It's just so you don't end up accidentally missing anything. Yeah, when they're small, you don't want to be trying to get so specific just on the edge and then end up like dripping half of it on the side. So it's more like just a kind of a rule of thumb. If you have impeccable, arm control and can treat just all the living tissue, go for it. But that's the recommendation that we make. So,
okay, awesome. How are the berries treated?
Oh, that's a good question. Using Lalcide Chondro to treat your stumps isn't going to get rid of, your buckthorn for forever, because there's always berries. There's always those droops. There's always the seed bank. And so you're going to get new whips coming up. You're going to get new saplings coming up. And so you're going to have to figure out how you want to treat those. And so some folks will come through with like a brush hog. Some folks will come through with like a flamethrower. But that's the same whether you're using a chemical, whether you're not using a biological, whether you're just cutting and walking. No matter what, any sort of treatment of those larger shrubs, you are still going to have to deal with that seed bank for a number of years, because there's just so many seeds.
Yeah, for sure. Is this available in the US?
Not at this point. I will say we are doing some trials in the States, just so we can have some American data. And I worked in the States for like a nonprofit very similar to the Nature Conservancy for many, many years. And all of my friends keep begging me to bring it down there to Michigan and Minnesota, where they have, just as much buckthorn, if not more. But it is not yet registered in the States.
Okay, good to know. Is it true that it can't be applied to buckthorn on a slope? If yes, why?
No, it could be applied to a buckthorn on slope. The thing you want to make sure of is that if you're cutting the buckthorn, that the top of the stump is flat. Because if it's on an angle and you apply the Lalcide Chondro, it's all just going to slide right off. And so for best efficacy, you want to make sure that, if you're cutting that shrub, that the stump is flat. It's just like if you don't want to tip your glass when you're trying to pour water in it, right? It'll all fall out. So.
Right. Okay. Someone here says, I used this product last year and it was relatively easy and straightforward. Most of the large trees in our area have already been treated with other products in other years, and we are now dealing with the smaller whips or seedlings. We treated every stem we cut, even the very small ones, but it was quite labor intensive. Any advice on dealing with thick growth of small diameter stems?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's an issue that you're going to have whether you're using a chemical treatment or the Lalcide Chondro. With all of those little whips coming up, there's no easy answers. I have heard others using like a brush hog and then having someone just come through and quick dab, 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 dab. We did that for like a proof of concept trial on honeysuckle, which kind of does the same last year too. And yeah, it is labor intensive, but it's less labor intensive than having to come back every other year to cut if you don't want to use chemicals in that area.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. There's many different questions here about the size of the containers, the cost of the product, just if it's affordable for like the average homeowner.
Right, right. Well, and the average homeowner would need an applicator's license to apply. So it's important that they would not be able to just, you can't just go to Walmart and buy it. Um, all of that information should be available through our website and through through our website. At this point in time, I think we've finished our pre-order sales, which we do at the beginning of the year for a significant price decrease. And I think we're right around that window right now. So the 1 liter bottle would be $75 just for 1 liter. But I believe there are bulk discounts. Again, I'm the research scientist, so I'll try to answer those questions as best I can, but I leave all of that stuff to the commercial folks. I like to talk about the science. Yeah.
Of course, yeah, no problem. Sounds good. Someone here says, I think you mentioned it will not cross root grafts. Do you find that surprising, or was that strain selected not to be too virulent?
Well, it's all about the Chondrostereum purpureum not going way down into the roots. And I think no matter what strain you're using, it's not going to go that far. It's not a long haul traveler.
Gotcha. Okay. This person says, nice talk and very interesting work. Did you select your chondro isolate from Quebec forests, or are you using the original isolate chondro PFC 2139?
Oh, I will have to check on that. So Simon, I will have to get back to you.
Perhaps Simon can reach out to you via email.
That'd be great.
That might be best. Okay, so I'll start going through the chat box here, see if there's anything that I missed. What do you do with the stumps once the bush is dead?
It's up to you. Like I said at the one Lestry trial. Oh, and it looks like Elsa's been answering some questions in the chat. Thank you, Elsa.
Yeah, seeing that now here too.
We found that the sphagnum moss was just growing over the stump. So, I mean, you could always come back and cut the stump and take it away if you want. But if you cut it low enough to the ground, it's going to degrade eventually, and then you won't have to really worry about it.
Right. Okay. Sounds great. After treatment, will the leaves that fall from the suckers affect the ground or other trees?
No, they shouldn't, because they have just the silverleaf disease in them. And that's from an enzyme produced by the Chondrostereum purpureum, but it's not like there's going to be basidiospores or anything on that spreading the Chondrostereum purpureum around the forest. So that shouldn't be a concern at all.
Right. Okay. This person says, I'm curious to know if the fungus will remain in the soil to effectively infect silverleaf disease on the following generation of buckthorn, since following removal of seed-producing individuals, the seed bank will produce many seedlings in the following years.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? I wish, but it needs those living tissues on a recently wounded buckthorn in order for it to actually survive and grow. And so, yeah, you can't just saturate the soil with it and prevent the future buckthorn from emerging.
Gotcha. Okay. I believe you touched on this, but would you apply the chondro once or each year?
I would apply it once. You know, it's always good to go back and monitor. So if you find out that something wonky happened with, you know, the summer student who was out there applying and they didn't do it properly, or you had a huge rain event, like just as you were applying, or perhaps you only had time to treat in August or something like that. Go back and monitor. In those sorts of situations, you might want to recut and treat, but it's not been an issue that we've had so far in our research trials.
Okay. I would like to know if it has to be in a paste or if it can come in a liquid. We have easily over 1,000 acres of over 75% infested urban woodlands in the Ottawa area. Forestry mulcher followed by a spray would likely be ideal.
Yes. And I think I will have maybe Elsa get in touch with you, Sean, about that, because I completely understand that issue. Yeah, if it's 1,000 acres, you can't necessarily go through one by one. So
yeah, for sure. So there's some questions about how you store the paste. So how do you store it? Are there any specific temperature requirements, things like that? 4
degrees Celsius is ideal. So just keeping it in the fridge is great. So just have a separate fridge for, your chemicals, or for your Lalcide Chondro if you have no other, chemicals, and you should be good.
Okay, sounds good. This person says, because the fungus is native to Canada, would testing need to be done before it is used in other countries where it may not be currently present?
Yes, for Europe, for sure. They would want to do further testing. But it's really quite interesting to look into the genetics on Chondrostereum purpureum, because there's not that much difference between the genetics of what you see at the Chondrostereum purpureum in North America and in Europe. There is variation, but because they're, on the other side of the ocean, we don't want to accidentally do anything that we, hadn't planned on doing. And so I would expect that Europe would certainly need more tests, or perhaps want to use a Chondrostereum purpureum specific to Europe for their forests.
Okay, thank you. We'll have maybe 2 more questions here. Does the silverleaf disease spread and kill nearby seedlings / seed bank as well?
Does it, sorry, I missed the last part there.
No worries. Does the silverleaf disease spread and kill nearby seedlings and seed banks as well?
No, there's not a concern of that. So any silverleaf disease that's in those leaves from those suckers, again, it would not spread to those additional shrubs in the area. So you'd have to apply it to a recently cut wound. You wouldn't be able to just spread the leaves around and hope it works.
Sounds good. And what specific pesticide license would be acceptable for this use?
You could have a landscape license or a forestry license. So you go on to the Ontario pesticide training and certification. If you can see me, I've got the book here. And you just take a little test, and then that's how you, that's more than a little test, it's a bit of work. That's how you get your applicator's license.
Okay, thank you, sounds great. Sorry, we had a couple more questions come in here, and then we'll cut it off here.
Okay.
How many stumps can 1 liter bottle treat?
It depends on the size of those stems, of course,
Right.
but we estimate about 80 liters per hectare. Obviously, if it's incredibly dense, you might want to go up to 100 liters per hectare, and if it's pretty, dispersed, you might be able to get away with 50. So that's sort of my little range of a window for how much you could treat.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, I see someone responded answering that too. Thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, so our last one, we'll leave it here. Our first attempt using this was not very successful. Oh wait, well, where did it go? 1 second here, I'm sorry. Okay, our first attempt using this was not very successful. Within 3 months, there was very vigorous regrowth, no evidence of silverleaf disease. I'd like to try it again. What would be the major reasons for failure? If it's possible, there may still be plant death despite vigorous regrowth. I cut back the suckers that formed.
Okay. So there are a couple of things that could have happened. I mean, it depends on what time of year. So if it was mid-June to mid-July, that would be great, but perhaps it was later on. If there was, oh, June, excellent, thank you. If there was either an incredible incredible amount of no, I don't want to say water, but if the buckthorn had everything that it needed to survive, like not drought and not too much water, and was just living really happily where it was, it could be more vigorous. The other thing that I can get concerned about with a fungus is if there's a lot of airflow in a very open forest, or a very, very dry open canopy, like if it was in the middle of a field, then you wouldn't have like the nice microclimate of humidity for the Chondrostereum purpureum, around that, understory stump. And so it could have been too dry, too open, too hot. But I mean, we had a pretty wet June, so I'm not sure. The other thing I would say is just wait. On some of our trials, we honestly didn't see silverleaf at 3 months, but then we would see it by 6 months or by 12 months. So the other thing I would suggest is just wait, because yeah, you may still see excellent control in a few more months.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk. Clearly lots of great interest, and we appreciate you answering all those questions.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
thank you again.
And people can email me if they have more questions. And I think Elsa put in the chat who to reach out to if you're concerned or if you are curious about cost and things like that. So it's support@bioforest.ca.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This webinar was recorded and will be posted on our website. Our next webinar will be held on Monday, March 28th at 2:00 p.m. and will focus on the status of black carp in the United States. So hope to see you all there and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.